today is a special day. On the Danay Garcia Podcast, I want to welcome Dr. Russ, who specializes in anxiety, which is like, I feel like is the most trended topic that, especially during these times, you must be a very much in demand doctor right now. You're like
Yeah,
the doctor of the world.
yeah.
Uh,
Anxiety is huge around the world right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I wanted to say thank you so much for coming in, for, bringing this subject again back to life, and for being curious enough to keep, pushing where does that come from? Why do we get attacked when we don't expect it? That's the thing. Like anxiety comes, you don't see it coming until you're like in the hole.
That's
and
right.
and it's very interesting because how can you prepare for something that you don't see that is coming? And thank you so much for joining me on this topic
You're
and
welcome.
for taking the time on this
No,
beautiful
it's
day.
fantastic. No, it's nice talking to you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Russ, why do we get hit by this anxiety? Is that what is anxiety? Like, how can you describe what anxiety is?
Okay, well, I'll tell you, I tend to ramble. So, Danae, if I start rambling, just pull me back to point.
Okay.
So, anxiety for me, I have a different definition of anxiety than most people. For me, anxiety is simply just anxious thoughts of the mind. That's all it is. It's not painful. It's what is painful is this alarm that we hold in our system. And a lot of us
Mm,
had wounding from our childhood. I grew up with a father who was schizophrenic. So
mm,
my house was in chaos quite a bit. So
mhm,
if you grew up with a lot of uncertainty in your childhood or wounding or trauma or whatever, it gets stored in your body because
mm,
you don't want to go back down into that body again. So what you do is you wind up staying in your head and just creating all these thoughts over and over and over
oh,
again because it's not safe because you repressed, you stuffed down this old trauma into your body and you don't want to go back down into feeling town again. So you want to
no.
stay in your head. So that's what happens. So when we have to stay in our head, if that's our only option, we start developing these ruminating, constant negative
Mm,
thoughts, and the brain has a fear bias, right? So to keep us alive 50,000 years ago, we had to assume that a crack in the reeds over there was a predator and not just the wind. Because if you
wow.
assumed it was a predator and you ran away, you survived. If you thought, that's just the wind, and you became lunch, you didn't make it, and your genes didn't pass on. So we are a society of people that has our brains have a fear bias, and then once you stress people out enough, that fear bias starts to come to the surface, and then people
Wow.
start making worrisome things out of things that aren't really that apparent. So we start making stuff up in our heads. And because human beings we have such imaginations, especially actors, we
Yes,
have such imaginations, we
totally.
wind up creating these horrible, warnings, what ifs, and worst case scenarios. And then we believe them. And then when we believe them, our body starts getting more alarmed. And then when we get more alarmed in our body, we start creating more thoughts in our mind. And then it just creates this alarm anxiety cycle. So what I do is I try and break the two apart between alarm in the body and anxiety in the mind. So anxiety is basically just the thought process of the mind. And if you can start seeing it that way, you can start separating from it. So there's a long answer for you.
No, it's the brilliant one. So why does anxiety come when you less expect it? When you are actually not thinking about anything fearful? Like what? Why does it come like that?
Well, I think
Because
it's
that's
something
what freaks you out. That's what it's like. It's
exactly.
like your heart goes up and you're like feeling like you're gonna die, and you're
Yeah.
like you were like reading a book. like
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story about that. My father, who's schizophrenic, as I said, his dad died when my father was only 10 years old. And my
oh.
dad went to his funeral and there was a tremendous number of roses at his funeral. So whenever my dad smelt roses, he would get into a panic, right?
Right.
Because it reminded his body of how he felt when he was 10 years old at his father's funeral. So a lot of the stuff that happens to us, we're not aware of. So somebody may be yelling in the background, and if you had parents that yelled at each other back and forth, that may trigger you, and you might not even be aware of it. So your body
Oh.
lights up, your body creates this anxiety alarm reaction, and then your mind, to make sure that it doesn't keep that uncertain and minimize the dissonance that you feel. So if you feel this anxiety in your body, your mind's got to do something with that. So your
Right.
mind actually makes up a story, and the language parts of our brain and the feeling parts of our brain don't really communicate all that well. So when we feel this negative emotion, our mind will make up a story kind of after the fact. So
Got it.
another example of that. So someone will have a panic attack in a grocery store, and
Right.
then they'll assume that grocery stores are the problem, and then they'll
Yeah.
start going to farmers markets and smaller stores and that. But it's not that at all. So the mind actually makes up stories after the fact to explain the emotion, but the mind may not actually be accurate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure your dad will have like some sort of panic attack with roses.
Yep.
Could be at a floor, buying flowers for
Anything.
whoever. Like, who would
Yep.
have known that that would be attached to it? And how can we break down those patterns? Like, how do you? It's like getting help. It's first of all is when you're like in a panic attack. I know you're supposed to breathe and calm down the brain, right? Calm down those thoughts.
Yeah.
It's funny because as an actor, you create. It's interesting how the stories that we tell ourselves, and
Yeah.
they really it can really transform into so many things. And what's weird is that I play a character that had panic attacks. So
Right.
when you try to understand somebody that have those panic attacks, I wish we had this conversation before I played that
Sure.
role.
Sure. Exactly.
but
Well, and
but
I might help you to stop the panic attacks, and you may need that for your acting
for
process. So
exactly,
it
so
might
how
not have helped you.
exactly know how to get there. But what's interesting is like I've learned that regardless of what you do, the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that even I try to understand from characters,
Yeah.
really transform your thinking, like really transform your choices in life. Like I feel like anxiety, us trying to protect ourselves from those that bad experience of anxiety, we tend to really put ourselves in prison to a point that we don't go out, thinking that that's the choice. So
Yeah.
it's like we kind of put ourselves in prison because of the stories that our brains, either consciously or subconsciously, are telling ourselves, and
Yeah.
and that's so powerful.
And
So,
our body too, Danae. Like our body is probably the biggest misunderstanding in mental issues is the role our body plays in it.
hmm.
Because when you're preparing for a role and you tell yourself that story, you start feeling anger or you
Oh
start
yeah,
feeling sadness or whatever. And
absolutely.
that's in your body. Like
Yeah,
that's in your body. And if you don't feel it in your body, it'll come out in your acting. Like you'll look at the reel and you go, I
yeah,
didn't really like that. I could tell that my
absolutely.
body wasn't feeling it. So
Yes.
when your body feels it, your brain feels it too. And your
Mm,
brain has to make sense of that feeling. So as an
wow.
actor, it makes perfect sense for you to feel, you actually feel sad in your body to
Yeah,
create the tears, to create the
yeah.
ability on camera to transmit that emotion. So
And
our
and
bodies are really powerful.
and we do that without acting. We sometimes we create a story in our minds, and it's transformed into something else, and it's something that happened probably 10 years ago, but
Yeah.
because you carry that story, it will be transformed, and it will change who you are as in today. And how do we deal with those stories that are hurting us, that eventually they get transformed into panic attacks and
Right.
anxiety, and because all that comes, like you said, from stories or trauma too. Traumas are stories too, right?
Absolutely. There's a story that your body holds. I had one
Wow.
patient who's
That's a
who's
good title for a book. There's a story
yeah.
that your body holds.
Well, Bessel van der Kolk, who's a psychiatrist out of Boston who deals with a lot of trauma, childhood trauma, wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, in
Wow.
which case he says, that when we go through these traumas, and I believe this totally, it's one of the premises of my book too, Anxiety RX, is that we hold these traumas in our body. And if we don't bring them up to the surface, we can't heal them. You got to feel it to heal it pretty much. But, you don't want to feel it because what happened when you were a child, you don't want to have to revisit that again, but you're
Right.
not a child anymore. You have a
Mm.
lot more resources than what you believe. And that's one of the things about anxiety and alarm is it makes you overestimate threat and underestimate your ability to deal with it. So there's
Mm.
this double whammy that we get. And then when we get into survival physiology, like our adrenaline, our cortisol, all that flares up in our system, we go into survival mode in our brain. And when
Mm.
you're in survival mode, you're not really able to access the rational part of you that can solve problems. So it'd be like if
Mm.
somebody came up to you and held a knife to your throat and said, "Here's an algebra problem. Solve this
Mm.
algebra problem." You can't
Mhm.
because you're in survival mode.
Right.
So we need to bring people back out of survival mode into this sort of grounded state in their body. And that's why, breath work and what I get people to
Mm.
do is find the alarm in their system. So I'll get them to sort of relive one of their traumas, not the worst trauma of their life, but one of their traumas. And I'll say, well, where do you feel that in your body? And if you
Mm.
do, once you do that, like I have people that usually, if you focus between your chin and your pubic bone, it's almost always in the midline, and it feels almost like a breakup. It feels like heartache. But some
Mhm.
people will feel it in their gut, some people in their solar plexus, some people in their heart, some people in their throat. And it's like finding that area, because I believe that that area is a part of our younger selves that's reliving that story. If you were yelled at by your dad, or hit by your dad, or you could never do anything good enough for your mom, I'll bring that up and I'll say, okay, where do you feel that in your body? And they'll go, okay, well, I feel it kind of in my throat, and it's a pressure, it pushes back into my heart. And I'll say, okay, we'll really focus on that, because that may be a conduit or a pathway we can use to start talking to that child who was yelled at by their parent, or who was hit, or who was, mentally, physically, sexually abused. Like,
Mhm.
we can use that as a conduit, that feeling in your body. It gives us a conduit to be able to heal the mind, to heal the issues in the mind. So I think we have to look at healing the mind. I'm not against talk therapy. I just don't think talk therapy fully heal someone. I think you
Mhm.
need to incorporate the body in the
Yeah,
healing
well.
of the mind, because that's where it's stored. So you've got to bring it up to the surface. You've got to
Mhm.
metabolize it in an environment where the person feels safe, and
Mhm.
your nervous system is calm. So you translate that calm nervous system to their nervous system while they're recounting the story, and they can start changing the way their body reacts to that story. Because so
Wow.
much of it is subconscious. So much of it is,
So
we
much.
don't know what's happening. Like my dad
Yeah.
with the roses, he didn't know what was happening, but he just smelled roses and went off, right? So,
Wow.
yeah,
So why are we so afraid to go back to our where everything started, knowing that we're an adult? Because there's
yeah,
a part of us that feel like a child.
sure.
Is that why?
Yeah. Yeah, because what happens is there's a theory, and I believe to this to most extent, is that when you experience a significant trauma as a child, like your parents get divorced, or one of your
Mhm.
parents dies, or something like that, part of you stays locked at that age. There's part of you
Wow.
that's still there, right? And if you have like an attached relationship with a parent or a caregiver, and they can give you lots of love and connection, you can move past that trauma. But a
Mhm.
lot of us, we had this trauma when we were younger, but we didn't have that caring connection that allowed us to sort of move past
Mm.
it. So it's still in us. So we don't want to go back and visit it, because it's like going back and visiting our 8-year-old self where our parents are screaming at each other. We don't really
Right.
want to do that, because what happens is the part of our brain, the amygdala, sort of has no sense of time.
I was
So
gonna say there's no
yeah,
logic there.
exactly. So there's no sense of time. So you're transported back to 8 years old, and you feel like you're 8 years old, even though you know consciously you're an adult. But there's part of you that takes you over, that becomes 8 years old, and then you have the abilities of an 8-year-old to solve your problem. So you really have to be able to bring yourself back into this really cognitive, conscious phase, that you are actually an adult, and you can deal with this issue now. You can go back and revisit it, because that's the only way you're going to heal it.
Right. Yeah. It just feels like we are so afraid to go back. Like it's thinking like you're stuck in the time. It's like you're putting yourself in a time machine, and like
Yeah.
you might never come back to present. It's like, like back to the future, back to the
Yeah.
past. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, how can I get back to my happy life? I underestimated it. It just feels like an it's funny. Like when we talk about things like that, I go back to me interpreting roles of like why in times of crisis we act like a child, like childlike behavior
Yeah.
when we are like in a huge, let's say, breakup or like high stakes. We go back to that child. Is like it's not logical, like we still have that in us, like
Yeah.
that really never leave us. To think that we're going to be adults doesn't make any sense.
Not to the
But
child, not if you regress to the child. But the thing is, when we get stressed, we tend to go back to the weakest link in our life, you know?
exactly.
So if you had a strong childhood where you felt, connected, and your traumas were kind of handled by your parents, and you move through it, you have the sense that you can do that. If, on the other hand, you had a trauma that wasn't handled by your parents, that was left unresolved, you will go back into that place, And then when you experience the trauma as an adult, you'll feel like you're, a 7, 8, 12 year old trying to
Yes.
deal with it. And this is what I see with couples, right? So couples that have both had trauma, you know, the female will go back to the time that she was, abused by her mother, and when she's 6 years old and freaks out. And the male will go back to the time that they were abused by their dad. I'm just giving examples here. And he's 8 years old. So now you've got an 8-year old and a 6-year-old trying to solve a problem.
Oh
And how do you
God.
think that's going to go? Not very well.
No.
As Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you? It's not going to work very well.
It's interesting. Like what would you tell parents that have children with trauma today,
Yeah.
to help them? I believe always in how can we make things better so things don't go, you know,
Right.
sideways, like prevention. When you have a child that's going through trauma, nothing you could do to avoid it, but it's here. What
Right.
can you do today to help your child grow into a better
Well,
adult?
make them feel better in their body, like find out, ask them, where do you feel when you think of grandma dying? Where
Hmm.
do you feel that in your body? And they'll usually say in their around their heart somewhere. And then put your hand over that area, as a
Oh.
parent. And then put the other hand on their back. And you don't have to say anything. You just say, "Look, I have you, it's
Mm.
okay. It's okay to feel bad. Like this is normal to feel bad. And I'm here for you." Because if
Mhm.
we know someone's there for us, especially as children, we can metabolize that trauma. We're built for that. We're built to be able to handle grief and stress and loss, but we need that support. We can't just do it on
Wow.
our own. And in fact, if we're left on our own, that guilt and trauma and loss will get lodged in our body. So if you
Mm.
have two kids, one kid whose parent comes up to them, finds their chest, holds them, and says, "Look, this hurts, and it's supposed to hurt. This is how things go when we lose our grandmother or we lose someone in
Mhm.
our lives." And then you have another one that says, "Oh, just buck up. And people die. We have to deal with it."
Boys
So
don't
that,
cry, the
yeah,
whole
boys don't
boys
cry, and
don't
that's a
cry.
huge one. That's another 4-hour podcast today. Like, boys don't cry. We
Boys
don't
don't
want to get into
cry.
that. We don't want to get into that. But it is one of those things where if you have a child, make them feel comfortable in their body. You can explain to them, absolutely. But it's much more effective if you can make them feel comfortable in their body. And another great thing about when you have children is there's this technique called bridging, which is every time that you leave their presence, you bridge the next connection. So if you're dropping them off at school, you
Right.
say, "Hey, have a great day at school. I'm looking forward to picking you up. I'll be right back here at 3:30. And I'm really looking forward to us watching that new Avengers movie tonight. It's going to be so awesome. Or I'm
Oh,
really looking forward to making dinner with you. We're making your favorite dinner tonight, which is tacos. I'm really looking forward." So you're
right.
always bridging the next connection. You're always letting them know that you're there for them time and time again,
Mm.
especially at school. And then when they're even younger kids, especially at bedtime,
Mm.
just knowing, like, have a really nice sleep. I'll be right here tomorrow morning. We'll make your favorite pancakes. I'm really looking
Mm.
forward to being with you again. So there's never a point where the child is just kind of like, "Okay, see ya, have a good day at school, bye."
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it's a concept called bridging, and I learned that from Dr. Gordon Neufeld in my training in developmental psychology, is you're always bridging the next connection because it
Wow.
allows the kids to sort of feel safe in their body.
Wow. And it's so important to teach them that mind and body are connected from the very
Totally.
young age. It's like, where do
Totally.
you feel it? What do you think? Why is it that emotions you can feel them in your chest? Like when
Yeah.
you hear like a really terrible news, like your body, like it's very interesting. Like when you say, "Oh, your body and your minds are connected." You're right. We all know that. Like you choke, like when you hear
Yeah.
like a terrible. Why is your body choking? Why do we feel out of breath? Is that like a defensive mechanism? Is that your body trying to
Yeah. Yeah. I
to
think
digest the news?
there's a stress reaction that goes along with emotionally troubling news for sure. So
Mm.
the body doesn't really know how to interpret a feeling about something and it actually happening. So there's subtle differences between it's not exactly the same. Some people will say your body reacts exactly to a thought of something than it actually happening. That's not exactly true, but for the most part, it is. So yeah, we are feeling beings. I write this in my book about, if you were just a brain and we just hooked you up and just pumped blood through your brain with nutrients and oxygen in it, would you feel anything? Like, would you feel anything? And I don't
Mhm.
think you would. We need a body to
Yes.
feel. And that's where life is. And so often in this society, we are living in our heads. And if you
Yes.
live in your head, every day is the same. Like there's you've
Right.
got to live in your body. And
Yes.
actors are great at this. Actors really, they know how they have to live in their bodies. And
Mhm.
it's one of those things, but most people were trained when you feel a bad reaction to go shopping or distract on the internet or whatever.
Right.
We're never really trained to sit with negative emotion for any length of time. There's always a way to fix it or heal it or cure it.
Mm.
But if you don't actually allow yourself to feel it, you'll always be afraid of it for one, and you'll never process it.
Mhm.
Like if I have a motorcycle out on my front yard and I read 500 books on how to ride a motorcycle, and then I walk up to the motorcycle and I go, you know what? I'm not going to get on it today because I think I need to read a little bit more about the brakes or a little bit more about the gear. So I go back in the house and I read some more and I read some more and I go out the next day and it's like, no, I need to know a little bit more about if you don't get on the damn bike and
Mhm.
ride it,
Mhm.
you'll never know and you'll always be afraid of it. So
Yeah.
that's, I think, what happens in our society is that we don't allow ourselves to feel bad. There's
Mhm.
always, oh, you have to feel better. But if we don't process grief, if we don't feel grief, it gets stuffed into our bodies and it creates an alarm situation where we feel we're subject to any sort of grief again in the future, we've never really known how to deal with it. So it creates a lot of angst in us. And then we shoot right back up in our heads. And then we live less and less and less in our feeling bodies and more in our thinking minds. And life isn't in your thinking minds. I mean,
Mhm.
I've assisted on neurosurgery where we can cut right into the brain and it has no pain fibers whatsoever. The brain has no pain fibers, none. All
Wow.
we have to do is anesthetize the scalp and the skull, and then
Uh-huh.
we can operate directly on the brain and people are often awake when we operate on the brain.
That's right.
So,
That's
because it
right.
has no pain fibers. So we feel in our bodies, and if we don't get into your body, if you don't feel safe in your body, for one, as a child, what happens is if you go through trauma, you don't feel safe in your body. So you start living in your mind. And that
Mm.
only up until about 20, 25, 30, after your first divorce, after your start of marriage doesn't work. It's one of those things where you just it becomes a habit to live in your mind and run
Wow.
away from any sort of negative emotion. So it's really about learning how to deal with negative emotion, realize it does hurt. Of course it hurts, but it's not that bad until you start adding negative thoughts to it. And this is
Mhm.
the same thing about panic attacks. People, when they feel panic attacks, usually they've got something in their lives where they're at a crossroads. They're faced with two opposing things. I had one of my patients was having an affair,
Mhm.
and she didn't know whether or not she wanted to go with the guy that she was having an affair with or try and patch it up with her husband, and started having massive panic attacks because she couldn't make the decision,
Wow.
right? So it's basically being able to deal with that feeling in your body and translating it in a way that you allow yourself to feel it. You can actually learn how to, dare I say, enjoy it, the
Mhm.
negativity.
Mhm.
Enjoy when you feel jealous, like, can you enjoy that sensation? Because
Mhm.
if you don't add all these negative thoughts to it, you can just experience it as a sensation. Sure, it hurts, but if you
Mhm.
don't add a lot of thoughts to it, it doesn't hurt nearly as much as but that's what happens with panic attacks. People start feeling this rush in their body, and people will describe this to me. It's like I was out the other day and I felt this really weird rush and I got lightheaded and dizzy and that kind of thing. But it's not until they start thinking, "Oh, is this a heart attack? Oh, is this a stroke? I'm having a stroke." That's when they freak out. That's
That's
when the
when they
panic
freak.
attack becomes this uncontrollable runaway train. And
Right.
it's true in a lesser extent with anxiety as well. If you can learn how to tolerate the negative feeling and just hold it there and connect with yourself and connect with that feeling and not add thoughts to it, you learn how to metabolize that feeling. And Bessel van der Kolk, again, in his body that keeps the body keeps the score, talks about this. It's not so much that we're getting people to get rid of their anxiety. We're just allowing them to reframe it so that feeling of alarm can stay there and they
Mhm.
can tolerate it. They don't have to compulsively try and explain it, because when you go up into your head and try and compulsively explain it, you make it 100 times worse. And
100%.
you never actually learn how to deal with the underlying emotion.
You
It's
know
like
what's
the motorcycle, you never get on it. You got to get on it and you got to fall off a few times.
you know what's crazy is that I love when you say, we're built to deal with grief. We're
Absolutely.
built like everybody's afraid not to feel because they think that they might die thinking of grief. It's like, no,
Right.
you're built to like overcome. You're built to, it's like, it feels like this conversation is all about empowering yourself to feel, to be okay with trauma or with mistakes, because all that is what you store, and that's what comes out, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're empowering us to feel like, you're in a crossroads, you made a mistake here, you're dealing with that, feel it, and try to see through you what, and then eventually you will get through it. It's not as bad as you think.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
And get support.
And get the
That's the other
support.
thing about unfortunate thing about our human wiring is that when we start feeling anxious, when we start feeling depressed, we withdraw from the very thing we need the most, which is connection from other people.
Why is
So
that?
I don't know. That's almost a philosophical question. I mean, I think I could start, going into polyvagal theory and that kind of neuroscience kind of stuff that says that we go into something called dorsal vagal shutdown, which is, to explain it, it'd be kind of like, when a prey animal gets cornered by a predator,
Uh-huh.
what they do is they completely shut down, they play dead because
Yeah.
that's their last resort. And we have a version of that in our human wiring that causes just to completely shut down. And I think depression does that. To some
Mm,
extent, anxiety, if it gets really intense, will do that too. So
mm.
we shut down, our heart rate drops, our blood pressure drops. We just stop feeling, so we go into this numb phase. And then when we're in this numb phase, we lose what's called the social engagement system. And the social engagement system is what actors use all the time because it's basically eye contact, tone of voice, facial expression, body language,
Totally.
that kind of thing. So
Yes.
when we have that connection with each other, we feel good, we feel
Yeah.
connected. But the problem is that when you get depressed or you get anxious and you get into an alarm situation or survival physiology, we lose that prefrontal cortex. We lose that front part of our brain that allows us to be connected, that allows that social engagement
Oh.
system to work. So when we fall into survival brain, we don't have access to that social engagement. So it's tough to make eye contact. Your
Mm.
voice becomes monotone. And
Right.
that's why people with social anxiety has such a difficult time because you're going into an environment where you need to use your eye contact, you need to use your facial expression, you need to use your voice, but you don't have access to it. So of course you're going to resist it.
Wow.
If I said, Danae, we're having a softball game this afternoon and we want you to play shortstop and you've never played softball before, you're not going to be too crazy about going out there and playing
Of
softball
course.
because you're not equipped to do it. So that's the
Absolutely.
same thing with people with social anxiety disorder is that they know that they don't have that eye contact, facial expression, social engagement system online. So why would they go into a situation where they need it? Of course. So they're
Mhm.
going to resist it. And the more they resist it, it's like grocery stores. It's like, well, obviously it's people
Yeah.
that's causing the problem. So I'm going to avoid people. But
Mm.
it's people that actually allow you to heal. It's other people. It's other people's nervous systems. Like we heal in community. And I think when in psychotherapy, we're going to start seeing a lot more of that in the next 5 or 10 years. We're going to see a lot more somatic therapy, a lot more focus on the body, a lot more use of psychedelics like ketamine and that kind of
Mhm.
thing. And to some extent, MDMA, which is not a true psychedelic, but it does help in PTSD. And these are the things that are going to start becoming used in psychotherapy. So the old talk therapy model is going to start fading away, and we're going to
Mm.
start seeing that in the next 5 or 10 years or so. So
That's
somatic
beautiful.
therapy, psychedelics, those things are going to, and groups, people heal in groups because,
Why do
we're
we heal in groups exactly? Why do we heal in groups?
I think how you get it. You see these people who go into these soccer games or football games in Europe and they
Mm.
all go nuts
Yes.
together. I think there is this kind of, or you see the like starlings when starlings fly and there's 1,000 of them and they're all float and they're all like moving as one big cloud. I
Totally.
think there's this kind of neural net that we haven't quite figured out yet as human beings that wires us all together. And there is some safety in that feeling of all being wired together that allows us, but it also, I think now with social media, we're using that against each other because we're forming these us and them factions,
Mhm.
and we're wiring with our particular point of view, and then we're taking issue with the other point of view. So it's actually working against us. So we're
Yes.
losing so much social connection now because of social media, and it's tearing the fabric apart. And we see that in the United States a lot.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting because it's like an actor. If you act by yourself, it's a different experience than if you act in a theater. In the
Yeah,
theater, you have a response, people are breathing, and you grow naturally. Like you project, it's like you go to another dimension as an actor, because you have a group of people that are quiet, paying attention.
yeah,
Everything is dark, and you just like, you feel this breathing audience that is in
yeah,
front of you. So the stakes are really high. Like the moment,
absolutely.
the moment
Well,
that the curtains go up, and you feel, when you finish that play, you feel so much more accomplished than just shooting one scene on a set. And don't get me
absolutely.
wrong, that's really intense too. But the rush of like an hour and a half play versus like, and I believe, and the entire cast we have, it's like this net that you're talking about, that whoever is not feeling at the top of their game really raised the bar.
Absolutely.
And I feel like happiness and healing,
Connectivity. Yeah,
connectivity
yeah,
is that. It's like it's a group of us. It's us projecting, connecting, and growing together. And
yeah,
people have underestimated that
totally.
pre pandemic and during pandemic. Is that we underestimate the power of us. And
Right.
I love the fact that you guys are considering community healing. Like this is, I don't know what that is, but it's like your feelings, I get them. It's like a connection thing. I live
Yeah.
it.
Well, I think it regulates our body. I think that's what happens, and laughter is when I did stand-up comedy for 15 years, right?
Oh, you know.
So one of those things. Yeah. So I worked at an urgent care clinic as a doctor in the daytime, and then I would go up and do comedy at night in the comedy clubs. And I toured with Yuck Yucks, which is a Canadian comedy chain, for a while as well. So their laughter is kind of like the response to you. So that's the back and forth, right? So you
Exactly. It's
get
like
that back and
a
forth.
tennis game. Like you just
Yeah.
throw the ball and they throw it right back at you.
Absolutely. And then you feel connected. And that's the thing, is like you really start feeling, that's how we heal. I think we get that feeling of connection. And I think what that does is it goes into our body and it starts unearthing these old traumas. And then we
Mm,
start, as the more we feel connected to ourselves, the more we feel connected to others, and vice versa. It's a reciprocating loop. And it works against us as well. The less we feel connected to other people, the more anxious and worried we get. And that's what's happening as well with our countries, is as people are feeling separate from each other, it creates this survival physiology, and then your brain needs to make sense of it. So when you're in survival, you need an enemy. You need
wow.
someone to go, they're the enemy, because your brain hates uncertainty. That's one thing the mind hates almost more than anything else, especially if you've had trauma as a child. Uncertainty is probably the thing that we hate the most, and that's why we worry, because
Mm,
worry makes the uncertain certain. Like if you have a lump on your side, if you have a lump on your side and you go, oh my God, this is cancer, there's a little part of your brain fires a little bit of dopamine in there when that makes sense. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. But then it's like, holy crap, I have cancer. So then the alarm gets worse, right?
oh,
So it's learning. I think, your podcast is all about planting seeds. So if I'm
mm,
planting a seed, I'm planting a seed of people getting into their body and allowing yourself to feel bad.
mm,
And if it goes on for a long time, like, get some help, get some therapy. And
mm.
specifically, I really believe a lot in somatic experiencing, Hakomi, like getting into your body, as well as talk therapy. Talk therapy, CBT is great too, but I think you really need both. You really need the cognitive explanation in your mind, and that's what Dan Siegel talks about when he talks about having a coherent narrative of your life. But you also have to have this connected feeling in your body as well, because like I said, body is where life is. You
It's,
live in your body. Yeah.
yeah, and it's connected to us. And
Yeah.
and your book Anxiety RX,
Yep.
where does that come from? What
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love to talk about it, because I've read a little bit about it, and I absolutely love your angle in this. It feels approachable. It feels like there's there's no judgment. It's like it's a part of something that we have to deal with, or if we have friends that they're dealing with that, we can understand it better. Because that's
Totally.
another thing. Like it's not just us. It's like our surroundings. Like how can we support them? We have to educate ourselves.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
everybody I talk to when I tell them that I'm an anxiety specialist has a mother, brother, father, pet fish,
yeah, somebody said choose a
whatever.
plant.
Everybody's, I go get my teeth cleaned and I talk about it. It's like, oh, my daughter has this, Everywhere I go, people say, my brother deals with this, and it's hard for people to understand really what anxiety feels like if you've
Yes.
never really experienced it or you've never been aware of it, really. A lot of people have anxiety, they're just not aware that they have it. So it's one of those things that I think, as you help explain to people that it's actually more of a state of alarm in your body than it is anxiety of your mind. And then
Mm.
everybody's, if you say I'm anxious today, people maybe they won't know what you're talking about. If you say I feel alarmed today,
That's it.
people will, because
Yeah.
everybody's been alarmed at one
We all
point in
been
their life.
alarmed at some point. Oh yeah.
So it makes, and it helps, it helps that with that empathy, that ability to feel, is when you say I'm feeling alarmed, someone will know what alarm feels like.
Oh yeah. No, we all
So
been alarmed. We could be driving and then,
totally.
freaking
Yeah,
crash happens in front of you. You just get alarmed. We
totally.
get that.
Yeah.
It's like really talking a language that we can all understand.
And that's really what it is. And it's the language of the body, and I think when we try and explain things with our mind so much, the problem really isn't in our mind. The problem is this old alarm, these old unresolved wounds that are stored in our body. And
Mm,
PTSD is like this too. A
right.
lot of this stuff comes from childhood, but PTSD comes from, combat veterans,
Mhm,
anything that happened, car accidents, that kind of thing. So if the problem is actually rooted in our body, if it's down here in our chest,
mhm,
why are we trying to fix it up here in our mind?
mm,
Because it's like the motorcycle analogy. You have to go into your body, you have to allow yourself to feel it, and sometimes we need counselors, we need therapists, we need people to help us with
right.
that feeling so we can bring it up and process it and realize, that feeling actually isn't that bad.
It's
It's
true.
it's when we start adding thoughts to it, when you start projecting into the future, because all worry is about the future. You can't worry about something that's already happened, right?
Right.
All worry is about the future. So it's like you mentioned it earlier, that time machine that we get into and project ourselves into the future, and then imagine how we're going to feel when we get there. And then
Wow.
we project into that, and we don't really see that we have to heal it through our body as well as
Mm,
our mind. I mean, it's not just one-sided, but we have to go in there, find it in our body, find the alarm in our body, because I do believe that alarm in our body is our younger self, that's it's asking for our attention. And if
mhm,
we have this child in us that's kind of got her hands up, or his hands up, like asking for our attention, and we distract, we go to the internet, or we go shopping, or we go somewhere else, that child is just going to feel abandoned again, and it's going to get more alarmed, and you're going to get more anxious or more alarmed.
mhm,
So it's a matter of like recognizing that alarm probably represents your younger self that was hurt, when
mm,
your parents divorced, or when even when your a beloved dog died. All
right.
this kind of stuff gets stored in our body. And if we can't bring it up into a healthy, nurturing environment, it kind of sits in there and rots inside. And
Mm,
then the next time something comes into our consciousness that reminds us of that, the whole thing starts again. And then we try and explain it with our minds, which may make us feel better for the short term, but it doesn't fix anything in the long term. And it tends to get worse over time. So that's it, is, what I'm planting the seed for is feeling it in your body and allowing it to come up, because you got to feel it to heal it. And you can't heal a feeling problem with a thinking solution. It just doesn't work.
mm. Yeah, no, it's actually it makes it worse.
It does make it worse.
And
Absolutely.
and you know what's crazy is that when we have those trauma and we already have that behavior in our minds, we start repeating that with other people. Like
Absolutely.
you teach your kids to be that way and you don't even know where it even come from.
Yeah.
And you got it from like your great grandfather that talked to you, but now you're talking to so you it's not a trauma that you're just living yourself. You actually can pass that on.
Absolutely.
And that is like a tragedy because
Yeah.
it's not like you just holding it. No, you actually giving it that much power that it's passing out to your children or taking it
Absolutely.
out, right? So it's
Yeah.
it becomes a pattern, and that's what we have to pay attention.
Yeah. And it's a behavioral pattern as well as a sort of an intergenerational one too. Like they did this experiment with rats at Emory University in Atlanta, and they basically exposed these rats to the smell of cherry blossoms and then a mild electric shock. So it created a stress reaction in them,
Right.
like so this the cherry blossom. And then those rats had babies, and those rats had babies. So the grandpups of the original rats were exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms, and they created a massive, like,
Mm,
stress reaction that the other rats didn't, because the other rats weren't exposed to cramp. So there's something that gets passed down through non-coding RNA or whatever. And sometimes as a medical doctor, when I talk about this stuff, I want to have a seizure because it just sounds so antithetical to how I was trained as a scientist. But we're seeing more and more that the children of Holocaust survivors have a much higher rate of anxiety and depression.
Really?
Yeah. So we're start seeing how stress gets transferred from generation to generation to generation. Plus, it depends on how sensitive you were born. If you were
Mm,
born very sensitive into an environment that is nurturing, you're going to be fine.
yeah.
But if you're born very sensitive into an environment that's not nurturing, that's traumatic, you're going to have a hard time and it's going to
Right.
show up. So it's a matter of being able to bring that back up to the surface and heal it in a way that fixes the problem rather than just fixes the thoughts. Because the thoughts, it's kind of like the way I explain it, it's kind of like having a rowboat and there's a hole in the rowboat. Now you can bail the water out. And that's kind of like going to talk therapy and talking your way through it and understanding the mind. But unless you patch that hole in the boat, which is the alarm in your body, unless you really fix the underlying problem, you're going to be bailing water for the rest of your life.
Wow. And that alarm in the body is there to make you survive, right? Is to
Yeah, I
what
think
be,
originally, yeah.
originally, I mean, back in the day, caveman style, it's
Yep,
like it's there to kind of, it's a survival mechanism. It's not against us. It's not to bother us, right?
totally. Yep,
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And
like
but
if
it
we
was
understand
designed.
that alarm is just here to save us. It's like
Absolutely.
it's like fear. Like people are afraid to feel fear, but it's like how could you not feel fear? Then you can be eaten by a lion. Like
Yes,
like you need to
exactly.
feel something to run
Yes,
or to go up a tree or to like cross the street with the cars coming. And then you wanna avoid fear, you don't wanna feel it. But it's like I always say fear is not here to scare us. It's here to tell us that something is worth paying attention,
absolutely.
right? People get so paralyzed, they don't want to feel fear. It's like you said, they don't want to feel pain.
Yeah,
Like you should not be afraid of fear. Fear is here to, it's like, it's the alarm. The problem
yeah,
is like when you let it up here is when it becomes toxic because
yes.
the mind is trying to find logic to why you feeling fear. And just if you pay attention to just that alarm without judging it, sounds
Yeah.
like it,
Because your
right?
mind will always come up with a story. We all have stress in our lives. It's like,
Mm,
if you're feeling alarmed, you may think, oh, it's because my tax bill is due and I don't have enough money to pay it.
yeah.
Or my mom's sick, or, my dad is I don't know what he's going to do next. I don't know if he's going to get drunk or whatever. Those are thoughts that your mind creates to make sense of the alarm we had in our body. And the alarm is protective, absolutely, but it's not designed to go long term. That's the thing. What
Yes.
happens is in 50,000 years ago, if there was a trauma, if you're being attacked or whatever, your adrenaline comes up, your cortisol comes up, your muscles get engorged with blood, and the blood gets pulled away from your internal organs, so you can fight or flee or run, right?
Exactly.
But it's not. That's meant to be, short term, like 2 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, you run from the lion, you're up the tree, you're good, you're
Exactly,
safe. It's like,
exactly.
but you
But
needed that moment, otherwise
yeah,
you're dead, right?
yeah, and in this society, it's long term. We've got this chronic
Mm,
secretion of adrenaline and epinephrine. And adrenaline is epinephrine, but and cortisol and all these stress chemicals are meant to be short term. They come up when there's a danger and then they go down. And there's a difference between anxiety and fear. Fear is like if I'm about to be trampled by a herd of elephants, that's fear, right?
yeah.
Anxiety is if I'm upstairs in my bed thinking, oh, I hope I don't get trampled by a bunch of elephants the next day. Like I hope I don't get trampled tomorrow. So that's the difference, right?
That's the
Fear is something
difference.
yeah. And here's the little thing. It's like if you can wait 5 seconds, you're dealing with anxiety. You're not dealing with fear,
Got
right?
it.
So if you can wait 5 seconds, you're dealing with anxiety, not fear.
Wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the way that I look at anxiety is like, well, we are definitely not comfortable.
So yeah, I mean, this stuff was supposed to be short term.
Got
This
it.
reaction was supposed to be, but in our society, you know, it's long term. So when we're feeling anxious, we need to feel something, or alarmed, I should say. We need a reason for that. So we go on the internet and we start going, oh, this vaccine stuff is crazy. Why are people getting the vaccine? And then the other side will say everybody should get the vaccine. So it is one of those things where we look for reasons to make sense of how we're feeling. right?
Right.
If we're feeling alarmed, our brain will start making up scary stories
Yeah.
because that's just what the brain does. So what I try and tell people to do is, can you be curious about your thoughts? Can you sort of take a step back from your thoughts and just see that they're just thoughts?
Mm.
And you don't have to actually pay attention to them, and they're not who you are. There's a great book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and he says, you are not your thoughts. You are the one that observes your thoughts. So you're able to
Amazing.
sort of step back and go, yeah, okay, my taxes are an issue and it is a stress, but it's not, I'm not going to allow that to really get into my body and really create havoc. I can see that that's just the thought, and that the thoughts are there to make sense of the alarm that I'm feeling in my body. So what do you do? What you do is you learn how to breathe properly. You
Mm.
know, you learn how to sit in a chair. You learn how to put your feet flat on the floor. You learn how to just sort of relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, relax your body, and allow
Mm.
your body to feel whatever it feels. And
Right.
then as you do that, put your hand on the area that feels alarmed, and really feel that connection with yourself, because that's probably the younger version of yourself asking for your attention. So instead of running away to the internet or shopping or whatever, you say, okay, I'm going to find you in my body. I'm going to find my alarm in my body, put my hands over it, put one hand over it, then the other on top of it, and really feel that compassionate connection to yourself. Because that's really what the child wants. It really
Yes.
wants that connection, and it wants your attention. It doesn't
Mm.
want you to distract. But your
Mhm.
mind wants to distract because it tends to make sense of this alarm, but it's just short term. Like
It's
it never actually provides you, your mind will never actually provide you with any long lasting feeling of safety. Because
mm.
it's like when you get stressed and your mind says, hey, relax, to yourself. Like, does that work?
No.
No. But if you take a few breaths, if you connect with
Mhm.
yourself, if you sort of feel your, your butt in the chair and your feet on the ground, and you relax your shoulders and you relax your jaw, and you just go into your body for a second, does that work? Yeah, it works a lot better and a lot
Yeah.
longer too.
It's just being comfortable in your own company,
Yeah.
right?
Just having faith in the world, just having faith in being outside, just looking out over the water and seeing that there's more to life than just you, right? Like
Mhm.
there's this expanse. A lot of people write about going out at night and looking up at the stars and just seeing,
Yeah.
the light from that star, started out 50,000 years ago,
I
and
know.
it's getting to my eyes right now. Like it just gets you to see that how, not how small you are necessarily, but that's part of it too. It's just how we make such a big deal about our own immediate environment when we're basically just part of this giant microcosm, or this
Mhm.
giant, world that
World.
we're in. And things just seem so, so scary. And think of something that scared the crap out of you 10 years ago. Doesn't
Mm.
even affect you now. Like you're not even concerned about it now most of the time. Like there are things that sort of carry on,
Yeah.
but the things that, I worried so much about getting into medical school. Like I stayed up at night. I was panicked, that I wouldn't get into medical school. And I didn't get in the first year. Luckily I got in the second year, and that kind of thing. But I spent so many sleepless nights worried about getting into medical school. And once I got into medical school, and once I finished, and once I started practicing, I thought, I don't like this. Like, I don't like this focus on pharmaceuticals. I don't like
The
this
same.
focus on kind of trying to fix the symptom of the problem rather than going deeper and finding the solution. I don't like the fact that I only get 7 to 10 minutes with every patient, and I've got to sort of hand them a prescription. And I'm not against medicines. I'm not against pharmaceuticals. I love pharmaceuticals. I used to prescribe them every day, and I think there's a great use for them. But I think with medical doctors, that's the habit we get into. If, there's a saying that says, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if
Yeah.
if you're trained to prescribe medication, which we are as doctors, that's going to be our first line. So when someone
Mm.
comes in to see us with an emotional issue, more than likely they're going to get a prescription rather
Mm.
than an ability to find the alarm in their system and process it. Well, I mean, because doctors don't have time either, so
Mm.
it is one of those things. But if you're going to go looking for your medical doctor for psychotherapy, we're not trained. We're not trauma informed. We're not trained, and so it's likely you're going to get a prescription. That's likely
Mm.
what you're going to get. So it is
Right.
one of those things that, and I think that prescriptions have their place, and I don't have any problem at all with people taking pharmaceutical medications.
But it's not a
And
solution all the time.
well, it's never really, so the antidepressants, like what, 40 million people at some point have been on antidepressants at one point in the world,
Mhm.
and it's never cured anybody. It basically handles some of the symptoms,
Mhm.
which in a way, sometimes the symptoms drive you to finally find what the cause of the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my issue with antidepressants wasn't so much when they didn't work, as when they did. Because when
Mm-hmm.
they did work, people just felt like, well, I don't really want to go into my issues anymore. And it tends to numb people out, right? So they're not anxious or depressed anymore, but they're not really feeling much of anything. And I don't
Mm.
know if that's a way of going through life either. But of course, you have to take every patient on their own merit, right? On some people, if they're not functional without medication, then use medication, right?
Yes.
But I think because it's overprescribed, and it's the way that medical doctors tend to deal with things because they're not trained in
Mm-hmm.
how to deal with it. So getting back to the book, the reason why I wrote the book is because there is another way of dealing with anxiety that doesn't require medication. And there's
Mm.
nothing wrong with using the tips in the book and taking medication too. But I got off medication, and the reason I got off medication is I started using the stuff that I talk about in the book. Focusing on your alarm, allowing yourself to feel it, not adding a story to it, really connecting with yourself, finding your younger self, all this kind of thing that you don't need medication for.
Is
So
that
that's, yeah,
is that how you became a specialist on anxieties because you understand it yourself based on your own
yeah,
experience? Is that
yeah.
why you decided I want to focus on this because it's we don't have the tools to deal with this?
Absolutely. And I think we're dealing with it in a way that's not helping. It's not
Exactly.
really curing, not that we're curing anxiety in general, but it's not really helping people in the long run. So I got into this thing because, I had, bad anxiety. Like there was points where I was like having suicidal thoughts because I was so anxious and I couldn't live every day in that. So I went to India and I studied anxiety there, and I lived at a temple in India there. I've done LSD, ayahuasca, MDMA, and psilocybin.
Oh
Yeah,
my
just
goodness.
not to get high.
No, no.
I
You
started doing
you
this.
were still
Yeah,
researching.
yeah,
You were
yeah.
really
This is
uh,
I'm in my 50s. Like
yeah.
I get my first LSD hit when I'm like 52 or something like that. And I've got a degree in neuroscience, developmental psychology background, and then a doctorate in medicine. So it's like I take the science part of it, and then I take the arts
Mm,
part of it, the artistic part of it, and then I mix it together. And I think, okay, how did I heal? Because all the things that I tried, from high level psychiatrists to jungle shamanic energy healers, didn't really fix it for me. So I had to fix it myself. And that's what I write about in the book, is how to fix anxiety for yourself, because you can do it. You can find a way to do it. And I hear so many people who are so dejected because they have done all the psychotherapy. They've been in therapy for 20 years, and they think, well,
yeah.
I'm going to be with this for the rest of my life. And if you're treating the wrong thing, yeah, you will be. But if you start
Mm,
treating the right thing, then you can really start to heal. So I still get anxiety. It's not like I've written this book and I'm anxiety free, but it just doesn't bother me so much anymore. Like I
mm,
don't go up into my head. I don't compulsively start making up reasons why I'm feeling bad to make me feel worse.
mm.
I separate the alarm in my body from the thoughts in my mind, because we started an hour ago talking about this. It's like anxiety is the thoughts of your mind, alarm is the feeling in your body. If you can separate those two, they can start to fade away. But if you allow the alarm to energize the thoughts, and the thoughts to energize the alarm in the alarm anxiety cycle, you'll never get out of that cycle. You
Yeah.
have to break that cycle apart before you can start healing.
And this is the power of somebody that is very curious. I mean, I talk about curiosity so much. Like we are so different. Like everybody can have different levels of anxiety. People can treat that anxiety or those issues in very different ways. But unless you become curious about your level,
Yeah.
like you did, you would
Yeah.
never get to that place. Like
Yeah.
curiosity is such an underrated thing. Like people were like, oh, curiosity, oh, like you're dangerous. It's like,
Yeah.
no, this thank God for curious doctors. Thank goodness for you to like really went deeper and tried everything in the books. Because without that, we
Yeah.
cannot move forward. We're
Yeah.
not so when people are afraid to be curious, and it's like we have so much technology and everything and we still feel like powerless.
Yeah. Well, curiosity, like you say,
What a shame.
yeah,
you know
curiosity is such a powerful thing, because when you're curious about something, you develop a degree of separation from it. So if
exactly.
you say, I'm really worried about my tax bill. I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford it. Now, can you step back from that and realize can you look at that in curiosity? Wow,
Exactly.
it's really interesting that I'm so worried about my tax bill. Is that really the cause of this? Or is it because,
Exactly.
I've just had a fight with my partner and I'm looking for a reason? So once you become curious about something,
Curious. Yes.
yeah, well, you start engaging your prefrontal cortex at that point,
Mhm.
right? And then you come out of your survival brain, because survival brain doesn't have any curiosity.
No,
It just
it
says,
doesn't seem
it
like
just
it's
says,
curious at
get the
all.
hell out of here, like you better leave this or you. So the survival brain has no curiosity. So as soon as you start engaging curiosity, you
Mhm.
start developing a sense of distance from your thoughts. And one of the things I say in the book is, when you develop curiosity, you can see your thoughts, so you don't have to be your thoughts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like because you're already open and curious to be like, okay, I don't think that whatever I'm thinking and feeling is not enough. This is not it. So you're curious about, well, what else is out there? And then you become
Yeah.
a little bit logical about whatever it is you're thinking. And you're like, I'm not going to give that much power because I feel like there's something deeper there. But
Yeah.
and if you don't have that level of curiosity, at least be conscious about it and force yourself to like heal. Because I think healing is not something that we're born with. I mean, we're born strong, we're born resilient, but we have to force ourselves to like work out. We have to force ourselves to heal
Yeah.
mentally. We have to force ourselves to be curious. It's just how much do you want it? It's easy to be like, okay, here's prescription drugs.
Right.
As much curiosity you're gonna like. This is it.
Yep.
I feel
Yep.
like
Because
I
it
feel
does.
like I feel like your value to the community, Dr. Ross, is really based on that massive amount of curiosity and resilience that you decided I need to heal for me and whatever it is that I have to do in my 50s after all the years of
Yeah.
study. All those
That's
years
true.
study that was not enough for you.
Yeah.
So you
And it
took
helps. The neuroscience really helps because it
sure
helps me
did.
explain it to people in a
Yes.
sort of a neuroscientific way, like your prefrontal cortex, your
Yeah.
survival brain, your brainstem that runs your body. It helps me, it gives me that credibility because I do go into this thing about your alarm is your inner child. So there's this really kind of ethereal, kind of spiritual part, but then again, it's grounded in neuroscience as well. So people can kind of go, well, yeah, he's a
They link
neuroscientist
the
as
two.
well. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm not, sitting there with like meditation and lotus going, you must. But going back a little bit to what you said about curiosity, what curiosity does is it takes the emotionality out of something,
Mhm.
you know. So, and when you're emotional, you're not rational. So it allows you to sort of get some perspective on your thoughts and really see your thoughts, so you don't have to be them. That's really what it comes down to. Is if you can see your thoughts in curiosity, your body doesn't have to buy into that whole scary story.
Yes, it's true. Dr. Ross, the seeds of knowledge and curiosity, it really changed people's perspective. And I feel, and I just want to say, thank you so much for putting that much into this subject, this situation that millions of people are going through, especially today. And they're actually lost about it. And again, when you're trying to find logic and you by any chance try to Google anxiety, all you get is like terrible. It's
Oh,
like
I know.
might as well die, It's like
Yeah.
might as well just give up. It's like it's everything in the internet is perfect for you to have a panic attack with anxiety and fear
Totally.
all at once for like
Dr.
24
Google.
hours.
Yeah,
So
Dr. Google, like,
yes,
don't go on there, you're just gonna scare the crap out of yourself. And,
absolutely.
basically, yeah, I had to save my own life because there was nothing in regular medicine or whatever that was allowing me to heal, so I had to basically find it for myself,
That's
and
beautiful.
that's why I wrote the book. So if you're gonna Google anxiety, put MD after it because that's all my YouTube, my book, everything is on that. So if you find, the way to
Yes,
find me is just Google the anxiety MD and all my stuff kinda comes up from there.
absolutely.
Right.
And as soon as this comes out, I'm going to be putting your website. I'm going to put stuff that people can really channel this subject toward you and they can really see it with the easy perspective of understanding how can you heal. Be curious enough is part of the deal because you can give tools, but everybody has different ways
Yeah,
to to deal with that, right?
totally.
So people, like dealing with anxiety, like you said, that they don't even know.
Yeah.
They have no idea. And I had a crazy experience once when my son was little. I remember I was driving and I was so tired that for a second my eyes went like this.
Yeah.
And that moment, I woke up. No, I didn't wake up, but I just went back to my normal driving self. And all I thought was my child. My child was passed out sleeping too. And that mindset of like my child's life it's in my hands, and I kind of blink for a second the wrong way. I saw my brain started finding all kinds of stories of how wrong that could have gone. and
Right.
I feel like acting has allowed me to deal with that horrible second that
Yeah.
nothing happened. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a great short film that could have gone really wrong.
Oh, yeah.
but it was a short film. It was a second of a short film. And I sometimes when I drive and I have little children in the car, I
Yeah.
go into that second, and it's crazy. It took a second. Like I it was a second of like I was exhausted. And
Yeah.
I go back there and I talk to myself like how I talk to characters. And I
Right.
look at myself as a character. I'm like, no, Danay, that was another day. That was 10 years ago. It was a second. You're
Yep.
not tired. You're rested. You are fed. And it's that conversation with myself. But I'm able to use those tools because of my work. You have to be, like you said, so in touch with you and your surroundings. And we're safe. And that little child in me back then was felt threatened, and my
Yeah.
child's life threatened. And I connected those thoughts talking to you, like, oh, this is what I do, and I didn't know I do that. That this is how I treat myself.
Well, the great thing about acting is it allows you to feel fear. It allows you to feel these emotions so you can process them in a way that isn't you personally. And that's why I
Exactly.
think a lot of actors had trauma when they were younger. A lot
Yes.
of them did. And I think this allows them an avenue to feel that trauma and process some of it and bring it back up to the surface
Exactly.
in a way that isn't personally directed to them because they know they're in a character.
It's in a
So
safe place, and it's
it's a
put out
safe
for the
place.
arts.
Yeah,
It's a safe place.
absolutely.
The problem sometimes is that you work so hard to get to that state of pain, but
Yeah,
then teachers don't teach you how to get back to yourself. So some
yeah.
of them, they just live in that very anxious place, and sometimes actors, they lose track of that sense of themselves, because they push you so hard to get to that place of like anger that character's going through, but nobody teaches you how you go back to yourself, because that's not you.
Absolutely.
And it's
Yeah.
weird how the stories, they stay with you, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, emotion is one of the most powerful ingrainers of memory, you
Yeah.
know? So everyone knows where they were on 9/11,
Yeah.
because that's what happens when you have an extreme emotion. It tends to sear that memory into your consciousness really deeply, you
That's
know? The
amazing.
other option of that too is sometimes things are so intense that you actually don't encode the memory at all. So we are humans are very interesting organisms for sure.
Yeah, we can black it out too.
Yep. No
And
doubt.
that, yeah. Dr. Ross, thank you so much for your time. Your time is much appreciated. And I wanted to say again, your curiosity for this subject is so valuable. And I wanted to celebrate that. And I feel like the world needs more Dr. Ross. But for now, we got books, we got YouTube channels, we got social media, and it's something that we really need in this world. And I want to say thank you for collecting and growing seeds of wisdom with me. Mental health is like, it's a subject that it needs to be talked out. And thank you for your work. I really, really, really appreciate it, and I'm inspired by it.
Thank you, Danai. I
Yes.
really have enjoyed speaking with you, and yeah, the more we can do to raise the profile of a new way of looking at anxiety, the better off we're going to be as a society. So thanks very much.
No, yeah, as much as we can spread that word out there, as far as we can,
Plant the seed.
that's all. Planting seeds
Yeah.
every day. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Danai.
Be safe.